Welcome back, everyone. We are back live here on Facebook at the Alert Desk, bringing you everything on primary day. Lisa Adams joins us because not only is she covering the mayoral race, not only does she know everything there is to know about local politics, she's got more updates because why not? Lisa, what do you have?
Well, I had a chance to check in with Doug Smith, clerk of the elections and county clerk, a couple of minutes ago. We always like to ask him how it's going on turnout. Of course, we won't really know until the polls close at 8 o'clock, but he's figuring we're going to have about the low 20% as far as turnout goes. And contrast that with last fall in the general presidential election, he said we had 78% turnout on that day. So, and again, so many of those ballots were mailed in. Back in the November election, about 46,000 ballots mailed in Erie County that they had to process. Today, he's guessing that he's going to have about 16,000 all told. Now, they've processed, so say he has 14,000 now, they've processed about half of those. Around 7 o'clock tonight, he's expecting a big bundle of them to come in from the Erie post office. So waiting until all the mail runs come in there, about 7 o'clock tonight, they'll deliver what they got in the mail today, and he's estimating that to be another about 2,000. So when all is said and done, probably about 16,000 mail-in ballots. But he thinks that a lot of, from what he's getting anecdotally from polling places, a lot of people at the last minute, even though they got the mail-in ballot in the mail, they decided to go into their polling place, surrender that, and vote in person.
And then, of course, the other story we're following tonight, because, of course, this is happening, people walking out of polling places with their ballots, bizarre stuff where they didn't put them through the scanner. A couple instances in a couple of different polling places where people have left the polling places without putting their ballot through the scanner, so we're trying to track those people down. Who knows what all of that means going forward. But, Elisa, let's talk about some of the other races here. The last time we chatted, we kind of touched on that interesting note in the race for state Supreme Court on the Republican side, one of the candidates not getting a recommendation from the Bar Association.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I think, gosh, I don't have
Patricia McCullough.
Patricia McCullough. I was going to say I don't have her name in front of me. Of course, the Pennsylvania Bar Association takes a look at these candidates, kind of their history on the bench in other courts, and then makes a recommendation. They say highly recommended, recommended, or not recommended. So, interestingly, she has been recommended by them in the past, but it's really some situation involving her husband, who is now serving time for some misappropriation of funds from an elderly person's estate, some of which ended up at a Catholic charity where the judge was working at the time. So I think that the bar felt that she hadn't fully answered for that at this point in time. They didn't tell all those specifics. I mean, they very diplomatically just said a situation has come to light that, from a previous employment that makes us decide to give her a not recommended status. So interesting, a lot of times you see recommended. When I do my research before voting, you can click in and you can read about the kinds of decisions they've made. You can read so much about the candidates and be an informed voter. Because it's hard for us to know much about these judges and statewide races if they weren't people who served on the bench in our county, for example. So it's a good way to look it up, and so you're not in the polling place going, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, who are these people? So most of the time you see recommended or highly recommended. Of course, I'm always looking for highly recommended because, why not?
You want a highly recommended judge. We've got a live hit coming up here in just a moment on Erie News Now at 5:30. So tune in. Watch us on WICU. That's Channel 12. So tune in. We'll chat here for about 90 seconds on air. Then we'll hop right back here on Facebook Live as we kind of flip-flop between the analog and the digital worlds. We'll see what else we can do tonight as this wild adventure continues on primary night. But, Lisa, as anybody knows who works in this business, election night is always one of the most fun nights to work.
It is fun. It was less fun when we couldn't know the results at the end of the night because so many people mailed in their ballots. Tonight, I think we probably will know just because, again, the county's already halfway through the mail-in ones that they have, and there's just not the volume that there was in November.
Hey, Mike, I've got Lisa Adams with me because we're doubling down our coverage here from the Alert Desk. That's what we're doing on Facebook Live. We're bringing in experts to talk about all of this, and Lisa's covering the mayoral race here in the city of Erie tonight. So, Lisa, a lot to look at there, as well as other races. What are the big ones in your eyes, the big races to keep an eye on?
Well, certainly it would be the sheriff's race, the county executive's race, and then the mayor's race. And I alluded in my report at 5 to the fact that a couple of these Democrats are hoping they get written in on the Republican side, but we might not know who wins if there are enough write-in votes on the Republican side tonight, because we'll probably get from the election office just a general number of how many write-ins there were, but not necessarily a breakdown. So we'll be really watching closely, though, to see who wins on the Democratic side for mayor.
And in that sheriff's race, it really has to do with the issues that have arisen during the campaign. This has turned into one of the most intriguing races for an office that oftentimes doesn't get that much attention.
You use the word intriguing. I'd use the word ugly. Been a little bit ugly. There have been a lot of campaign signs around, though, in people's yards. So clearly, each one of these candidates for sheriff has their constituency, and we'll see how it pans out.
Certainly is a lot to keep an eye on. We've got people all evening on Facebook Live. We have our reporters cycling in and out. We'll have the county executive in just a moment. We've got so many experts breaking down everything you need to know on primary night. So tune in to us on Facebook. But Mike, we'll send it back to you. And we're clear of that, so we'll let Lisa get out of here, and we'll have a special guest in just one moment. Lisa, of course, a special guest as well. Everybody's special on Erie News Now, so Lisa, thanks for taking the time.
All right. Thank you for having me.
And we continue on here. We've got live coverage on Facebook Live as we try to bring you up to speed with everything you need to know on this primary election day. There's so much to keep an eye on and so many intriguing races. And we've got someone joining us in just a moment who knows just a thing or two about winning races. She's kind of made a living of it here over the last handful of years, and so she'll talk about what she's learned here in her life in public service. So let's welcome her in, somebody everybody here is likely familiar with, and that is County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper. County Executive, thanks for being here. How nice is it not to be sweating on primary night?
It's always great to not be the one who's, nervous and concerned about what's going to happen in this election. And obviously this year, that's not me, but I'm very anxious to see who our candidates are going to be.
As you kind of watched this unfold over the last handful of months, and you saw who was going to run, you saw the campaign start to play out, was there ever a moment where you thought, boy, I should have signed on for 4 more years?
Not really. It was a hard decision to say I'm not going to run again, but once I made that decision, I knew it was the right decision for me and probably the right decision for the community as a whole.
Looking at that, a lot of the people running here, not a ton of experience in major leadership roles. You'd served in Congress. We don't have anybody with that sort of resume coming in. Does that raise any eyebrows just because of how vital this job is going to be because of the influx of federal money?
Well, I think the concern is, first of all, county government is a really complex form of government. There are a myriad of things that you've got to know, got to understand. And of course, I didn't know everything when I walked in the door either. So there is always that learning curve. And anyone who gets in there hopefully will have the skill set to be able to take that on. But I think this added pressure because of the money that's coming in has to really be looked at carefully. There'll be a lot of entities pulling for this money, and we're getting about 52.3 million, I believe it is, and over 2 years we'll get half of it now and half of it a year from now. And I believe that we need to work very collaboratively with those others getting the money and to look at how we can leverage the money we're getting in the Erie County community as a whole for other funds that are out there and really help to transform our community. This is a moment in time that we'll never have again. So we're working on the first half of the money right now in county government, but the second half will come. And I believe we'll have some strong plans in place, and hopefully then they'll carry on those plans next year, whoever the next county executive is.
Is this something where, again, with elections, it's never going to be the case because people move through the ranks of government, some people leave, some people move up, but after finally getting a group together that figured out how to spend money like this, because that's no small order. You finally had people in place, you'd figured out a system that by all accounts really seemed to work. Is there any frustration realizing that you're about to hand it off to a completely new team who's going to have to figure that out on their own?
Well, there's concern about that. And yes, we've done, I think, a really good job of it, and the people on my team have really delved into all of these opportunities and I think done a great job. My hope is that the next county executive Certainly they're going to bring in their own team for their internal office and those key positions. But I hope that they keep most of my directors on board, because they are the people who really have been dealing with this pandemic, now for over a year. They're the ones who've been working on so many other initiatives in our community prior to the pandemic and now during the pandemic, and I think they have such a great skill set that I really hope that happens. If that happens, I'll feel very good about where things will go.
How much of a role do people like that play? Because you're the face of the franchise, so to speak. When you think county government, you think County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper, but how much of it is what you're physically doing, and how much of it is having that great team that makes everything work?
The one thing I think I do really well is find very talented people. And I think I've found a lot of very talented people to lead county government departments. And they play an absolute crucial role. So many of the initiatives that we've been able to achieve over the past 7.5 years really have been because that one project, whichever one it was put in the hands of a very skilled leader. We can take the public radio system, for example. That was John Grappy, who obviously worked with me, but he was the one who really drove this and was able to get the public safety community behind it, and of course has been working with our contract entity, and so really driving that all the way through. And with the pandemic, Melissa Lyon, what a talented public health director she has been, and along with some very, very talented people in the health department, I think have led our community very well through this pandemic. And I, of course, put a lot of faith in her and her team, and let them be the guide. And so I think that's with every single department, I feel like I just have some wonderful, skilled, talented people in place, and I hope that they stay.
If you could give a piece of advice to all of the people running for county executive, something that you wish you'd known going into the job, what would it be for them, something that they may not realize?
Gosh, that's an interesting question. I think one of the things is just be as collaborative as you can. Just reach out to whether it's the mayor of the city or the mayor of Corey or your other elected officials in municipal government. Reach out to your for-profit companies and your nonprofit companies, knowing that county government, you really do see things in a very wide way. You see that, you have that 10,000-foot view of Erie County, and you can actually bring information to the table for those entities that will help them do better in their positions. So I think it's just the collaborative nature county government needs to stay, I believe, kind of going down that road. I've done a lot of convening of people, and it's helped us, I think, get more money into our community because we're speaking in one collective voice.
Speaking of that and the idea of having to work together, how difficult was that when you took on a county role after being in Congress, where things can really get bogged down in partisanship? Then you take over the ultimate purple county, where you have to work with everybody regardless of political ideology. Was that a bit of a learning curve, to realize that you might have opinions here, somebody else has opinions here, the rest of the county is somewhere in between, and you've all got to make that work? Actually,
it's one of the things I love about our community. One of the things that I didn't like about Congress is how partisan it was. I'm actually a moderate. I'm in the middle. I think most people are kind of close to the center, either left or right. And so working in a community like this, you can find people on the other side of the aisle who think very similar to you. You may just have a different party affiliation, little left, little right. And so it's one of the things that's great about this position versus being in a legislative body where you really are pulled more to the far right or the far left, simply because that's where the parties are headed these days.
So in a position like this, you can actually espouse what your actual position is, and instead of drawing hate from the party, in our area, you might actually get more fans, even if it doesn't necessarily agree with the party's ideology.
Exactly. One of my closest allies over these years has been Dave Mitchell from Corey, the mayor of Corey, who's a Republican, and he and I have worked on a number of projects together, including blue zones and some economic development projects, and I think we have a mutual admiration for each other, different parties, but we understand that we've got to work collectively together. Local's where it's at. Things are being done on a local level. We cannot wait for Harrisburg or Washington to come in and save us. So we have to work together across the aisle, no matter where you stand on issues. We're going to find the middle ground.
Is that the most important thing for anyone who ends up with this job to understand, is that holding a firm political ideology to the left or to the right probably isn't going to get the job done in an area like this?
It will not serve this community well. You know, as you said, we are the ultimate purple county.
Yes.
And you have to understand, you've got some, you know, you've got the urban core, you've got the suburban layer, you've got some very rural areas. Every one of those communities counts. Whether they voted for you or not, it doesn't matter. You know, you've got to serve the entire county. And that was one thing that myself and Gary Lee and my team has always been espousing, is that we are county government, and we cannot just be looking at the issues of one area. We have to be looking at the whole of the area, which includes having people of diverse political opinions also.
Because, you know, it's easy to see the city of Erie and think, okay, the office buildings are in the city of Erie, but more of the people are outside.
That's right.
Of
Almost
the city of Erie.
two-thirds. Almost two-thirds of the people live outside the city limits. And I'm always preaching that whenever, you know, if we're talking about the community college, it's a county community college. So yes, we have to think about how the people in the urban core get to this new school wherever it's at, but we also have to think about how does the person who lives out in the rural area access that also. And so I'm always trying to push back on people that you've got to be thinking in this more global way.
Do you have a couple more minutes here to chat?
I do.
All right, let's talk here then. As I never get a chance to just sit down and actually chat with you and not have to, you know, get out of your hair because you're trying to make everything work for the county, because you got a little more important job than what I sit here and do all day. But as you look back over your term as county executive, what are the things that you look at and you say, boy, I am really proud of that? And what's a thing or two that you say, in retrospect, I'd have done that a little differently?
Definitely, I'm very proud of our work during this pandemic. No one saw this coming. Obviously, it's hopefully once in a generation event, but I think that how we all collectively handled that, we've saved lives in this community. We've come through it, you know, everyone's been affected by it, but come through it and maybe better than some communities. And so I'm very proud of that work, which is still ongoing, obviously. I'm very, very proud of our public radio system. That was something since the Albion tornado of 1986 or 85, I forget which year, but it was
Mike
a long
Ruzzi, it was just getting started here when
time ago.
That dates it for you.
Our public safety community has been saying since then that we needed this new interoperable system, and yet no county executive before me was able to get it done. And it was something I made a pledge on when I was running, and we did it. It took a while longer than we thought, but I'm very, very proud of that system. I'm really proud of the work we did in economic development. And when I came into office, Develop Erie was talking about this rail terminal, and there was a lot of excitement around that. And then it became apparent that they were not in a good financial place, and that things were kind of imploding, and they did. They went bankrupt. So now we had our economic development system really in complete disarray. And so cobbling that bit together, I think we have actually a much stronger economic development system now, with the chamber taking on some different and better roles, and then the Erie County Redevelopment Authority has really grown into a much more impactful agency, as you see most recently with the purchase of EMI and Quinty, and then the demolition will come soon after, and then there's going to be even more happening. So I feel very good about how the position our economic development ecosystem is in. Certainly lots more work to do. Another thing I'm really proud of is the library, especially the Idea Lab at the Blasco Library. Huge improvement in allowing that space to be there for our entrepreneurs as well as our tinkerers, our people who just want to learn something new, and just our library system in general, which I can't take credit for the whole system, but I can take credit with my leaders of the library for some of the newer things that we've done, like I said, including the Idea Lab. And those are just a few things I can think right off the top of my head, but there's more that we've done internally that no one will ever really know about. When I came in, we didn't have an IT system, we didn't have an IT department. So
Kind of important in the 21st century.
Yeah, IT was embedded into every single department. So when I brought Eric Friedman in to lead that department, he actually had to introduce people to each other. So an example was the person who worked IT at the prison, he's the only one who knew that system. And so if he wasn't there and something went down, there was no one else to call.
Don't call out sick.
But now they're all trained, cross-trained, and they could move to another department and help out. You know, the proverbial somebody, I always say somebody hits the lottery and doesn't show up tomorrow, you know, someone else can pop in and do that job. We were called the personnel department, not the HR department when I came in. We've completely transformed that department into a much more professional, employee-centered department. We started an internal wellness program, which has been wonderful. We've seen our premiums for health insurance decrease because of that, and people are just living healthier in county government as employees. So that's just some of the internal stuff that most people don't know about, and there's many other things like that we did. We changed procurement, I think made it much more friendly to our business communities on the outside in terms of that they can do business with the county, and I think we've made it safer and more secure, which is something I felt was really important coming in. So there's a lot of things internally I've done. There's a lot of things externally that we've been part of. And again, I think finding some great talent and just bringing them in has done wonders for the service that we give to the community at large.
I tell you, that's one of the biggest things in this job. Once you start learning the interworkings of county government, it's all these people who, as a voter, you never hear about, but then it's like, oh my gosh, they make X, Y, or Z run, and without them, things can just fall apart. It's all about having good people. So, County Executive, one final question for you here, and then we'll let you enjoy a primary night where you don't have to care who's winning and how results are, at least in terms of seeing your name on that ballot. But what's next? Do you want to stay in the political scene in public service? Certainly, after your job in Congress, your work here as county executive, there would be opportunities there, or have you had enough of this way of life and other people can deal with it?
I don't see myself running for elected office again. I think I'm done with that. I honestly never thought I would run for elected office until, I did at 50 years old, and I certainly don't regret it at all. In fact, it's been an amazing part of my life, and I'm very proud of what I've done as an elected official. But I believe my days as an elected official are over. I don't know what the next chapter of my life will be. Some of it will be, of course, pleasure, traveling, playing with grandchildren and stuff. But I know that there's more for me to give to this community, and I will find ways to give back, just not in an elected office.
There it is. County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper taking time with us here to talk about her time in office, to talk about the election. We drive her nuts, but we don't get to do this for too much longer before you're out of the job. So, County Executive, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate
Thank you. Always enjoy
taking
being
the
on
time.
with you.
We'll give you a chance to get out of here. There we are. So.
All right, thank you.
And we continue to roll along here on Erie News Now at the Alert Desk. It's County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper, who we just had joining us, and so we of course have her every Wednesday as well. The highlight of my week by far, joining in on those county conference calls and those. So a lot to learn here as we cruise along here on primary day. We've got more guests coming in throughout the evening. Well, we have a moment. We've got our Elspeth Meisner standing by, so we'll bring her on over to the Alert Desk and we'll welcome her in, and we'll talk about what we're seeing here on primary day so far. She's following a handful of races for us, and she's got an eye on everything going on out there, so we'll bump to our cam of downtown Erie, which is our generic shot that we throw up when we're letting somebody put a microphone on. So we'll let her get situated and get a microphone on as we look over the city of Erie on a gorgeous day. So, beautiful Tuesday afternoon here in Erie as we cruise along on primary day. So, we've got Elspeth all situated. We'll get her mic on and bring her in and let her join the conversation. So, you're following a handful of races for us here, but let's start with something aside from the races, and that is amendments and referendums on the ballot. What are these things?
Well, Ethan, really great question. A lot of people, when they're going and filling out their ballot, they're checking for those big party races we've been talking about all day. The county executive, the mayoral race, sheriffs, maybe township supervisors or school board members. But at the end of the ballot, there's a few questions that people might say, well, this is not what I'm used to seeing. And there's 4 questions on there. So we're going to kind of break down what each of those questions are. 2 of those questions are all about the role of legislative power. And when it comes to a governor, especially when he's declaring a state of emergency or a disaster emergency as well. Now, right now, the legislative wants to be able to end that, end an emergency after 21 days. But right now, the governor has that power. So these 2 questions are all about having the legislative having more power in that sense. Another question deals with fire departments and the role that they play. So right now, there's a handful of money that can be available for all those volunteer fire departments, but they're saying that some of the career fire departments, they should be able to apply for these loans as well, which is really fascinating because, yes, you want to help out those smaller volunteer fire departments, but you also have the ones that people rely on it
Down
for a
the
job.
road, right? City of Erie, as
Exactly.
opposed to, say, Fairfield out in Harbor Creek.
Yep.
Should both be eligible? Should only one?
Yeah,
Big question.
That's the decision. Now, that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration. And the fourth and final question is if all levels of government should be prohibited from discriminating based on race or ethnicity. So 4 big questions on the ballot. And the unique thing about these questions is anybody can answer those questions. It doesn't matter what party you are affiliated with, Republican or Democrat. Everybody has the ability to answer those questions. And they are yes or no questions, but just making sure you have the knowledge about that before you go in is super important. So if you haven't voted yet, you still have a few more hours. Polls close at 8, but make sure you're well versed in what those questions are before you just go in and mark yes or no.
And what other races you keeping an eye on this evening?
Definitely the Mill Creek race. We have a few races out in Mill Creek, especially when it comes to supervisor and a few school board races as well. But the supervisor race, it's interesting. We have Kim Clear running, Kurt McCaslin running, John Morgan running, and one other candidate running. We have a handful of people on that ballot. So interesting because Mill Creek's a big township. A lot of people reside in that township. A lot of people depend on the supervisors making informed decisions that would best fit the whole community and township as a whole. So we're focusing on that one, as well as a handful of other smaller races across the board too.
Yeah, in that Mill Creek race, the really bizarre thing there is that we see Kim Clear challenging a Democratic incumbent. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly rare to see, especially, and it's not like a new incumbent by any means, but Kim Clear moving from county government, wanting that job in a local government. Yeah. Strange to see, and that race has been kind of contentious from the get-go.
And also, those are 2 people that people recognize those names. Right. John Morgan, he has been prominent in the Mill Creek community for a long time. Kim Clear, she's been prominent in county government for a long time. So people are familiar with those names, but they were looking to step into other roles as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's a close race or where that goes from as well.
Let's talk voter turnout now for a moment. I know you'll probably be out later tonight checking in at some polling places, things like that, but just from your own experience voting today, what'd you see in terms of turnout?
Definitely a lot different than what we saw all the way back in November when people were voting. Obviously, it was a presidential election, but now it's smaller races, smaller elections, so not as many people have been out voting. At least that's what I saw. I was out first thing this morning, and compared to 6 months ago in November, long line outside the buildings. We were seeing that many different places, long lines, people waiting 15, 20, 30, 40, an hour long to get in to vote. But today, for me, I had no issue. I walked right in, casted my ballot, headed out. I don't know if you had the same thing or if it was...
Same boat. There were 3 other people in the building at the time who were voting.
Yeah.
Literally right in, right out. I actually had that last fall, even though we had massive turnout. I just managed to get in and out in Wesleyville, but just a fluke thing there because we know we had big turnout in that race. Now we've got a lot more to talk about here as we look at these local races. Let's take a moment and talk about that City of Erie mayoral race. We see no one running on the Republican side, but Joe Schember facing opposition in his own party. We've got Tom Spagel and Sidney Zimmerman running in that race. Unusual to see, again, an incumbent facing challengers. You're out in the community every day. I know you're not always asking people about this specific race, but you see what people say online. You hear what people say when you're out and about. What's your general sense in terms of the job people think that Mayor Schember has done in his first term?
Well, certainly a lot of people can agree Mayor Schember has had a very interesting first term dealing with some of his own health issues when he was battling cancer. But then also you had the pandemic hit our area. You had some of those what was peaceful protests turned not so peaceful protests in the city that he had to handle. So he's had a lot thrown on his plate for his first term in office. So I think a lot of people, that I've spoken to in the community have been happy with the job he's done. But I think it is interesting. You do have Tom Spagel, who is a prominent figure so far. He's been involved in the community for a while, wanting to, step up and throw his hat in the ring. We also had Sidney Zimmerman, a young woman, 28 years old, recent City of Erie grad from the area wanting to throw her hat in the ring as well. And I think it's great that so many people want to get involved in the city, want to get involved in the government. But I think it is going to be certainly interesting to see, what happens tonight, and if we have currently Mayor Schember for another few more years, or we change it up. But tonight's all about the nomination, securing that nomination. So people might think, oh, I hope he wins tonight. You hope he wins a nomination, or you hope Spiegel wins a nomination, or Zimmerman wins the nomination. That's a big thing to consider for tonight for the primary.
Got a few minutes?
Yeah.
We'll keep you around. We've got a hit at 6 coming up in a little bit. We'll do that together again. For those of us who are watching on, or those of you rather, who are watching on Facebook, we're pulling double duty back here at the Alert Desk tonight. We're largely digital with you on Facebook, but every once in a while we migrate on over to the analog side of things and do our hits here on Erie News Now. We're in Erie News Now at 6 right now. You can tune into that. Eva Mastromattio is down at the courthouse. She's talking with County Clerk Doug Smith, so we'll hear about that. She's going to chat about the race for county executive as well, so a lot to learn there, so tune on in, WICU and WSEE, channels 12 and 35. But we're going to keep rolling here on Facebook Live while we have a little bit more time. So, Elspeth, one more question here before we get set for Erie News Now at 6. We've got just a quick one here, but that sheriff's race, we're seeing that draw a lot of attention too, just because of different issues that have arisen during these campaigns. And this is bizarre to see a race like sheriff get this much attention. There's only 3 people running for it. Brian Schenck, the Republican, is running unopposed with only 2 Democrats, but a lot of talk about this between Campanelli and San Filippo.
Yeah, certainly a lot of things have come out in the past, several weeks, several months since people started establishing their campaigns and everything, especially about if they're the right fit for our sheriff. And like you said, it's a very good point. It's sheriff, so it's not just the city that they're governing, it's everybody. So whether, you're out in Mill Creek, you're out in Harbor Creek, you're out in Summit, you're out in Fairview, you're still voting for sheriff of who's going to govern and who's going to play a prominent role in that. I do think it is interesting because, like you said, only 3 people on the ballot, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, but still I think everybody's bringing their A game and they want to, see what they really want to try and get ahead and see what comes out of this race. So it will be interesting to see tonight about who secures the nomination.
We'll have to wait and see. We're going to get ready for our hit here on Erie News Now at 6, so stand by with us, and we'll be up in just a moment. Mike, good evening. We've had people shuffling in and out of our alert desk here. We're live on Facebook for anyone who wants to join. We've had Lisa Adams, Paul Wagner, County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper. We'll have former Representative Phil English in soon. At the moment, we have Elspeth Meisner with us. She's looking at a handful of different races tonight, but you're also just out in the community every day. What are you hearing from voters as kind of the big issues they're looking at here in these local primaries?
Ethan, it might be a cliche answer, but a lot of people say they're looking for leadership in one way or another. We have a lot of big races this year. We have the mayoral race, the county executive race, even the sheriff race getting quite a little bit of attention recently. And I think a lot of things that people are seeing, especially with the county executive, since our current county executive, Kathy Dahlkemper, won't be seeking another term in it, is they want to see what other people can bring to the county, how they can help the county, especially because the county is going to be receiving a lot of money, and how the next county executive is going to handle that, how they're going to distribute that money and make sure everybody gets their fair share. We're curious to see what's going to happen, who's going to be our next leader for the county itself. I think another interesting thing along with that county executive race is that we saw a lot of County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper this past year, and how much of a role the next county executive is going to play too.
Lot to look at there. A lot more coverage for you on Facebook Live, so make sure to tune in and join us. We're going to be live until 9:30. Polls close at 8. We'll have results as soon as we can bring them to you, so this will be the first place to see them on Erie News Now on our Facebook page. But Mike, we'll send it back to you to roll along on the television side of things. Alrighty, and we are back here on the digital side. Elspeth, we'll let you get out of here and get back to your night job, your day job, I don't know, evening job. It all runs, it's your all day, every day job, let's be honest. This is news. So we're going to let Elspeth get out of here. We're going to have another guest coming up in just a moment. So much coverage for you tonight on Erie News Now at, or the alert desk rather. We're not at any time. So we're just cruising along, bringing you up to speed here on primary day. because there's a lot of races up and down the ballot. We're paying attention to all of them. We're looking at amendments and referendums on the ballot. We have former Congressman Phil English. He'll join us here soon as well. We've got issues with people walking out of polling places with their ballots and not feeding them through scanners. That is a special one, something you thought you might never hear about, but here we are, and indeed we are hearing about it. Now, it's not a ton of instances of this. We're talking fewer than 40 at a couple different polling places. But if you're one of those people, or you know people, or even you know people who voted in Erie or Girard, ask them. Ask them if they walked away with their ballot, whether or not they have a paper ballot with them. And if they do, ask them to take it back to their polling place so that their vote can count. So, yeah, a lot to look at there, because there's frankly just a lot of information all throughout the area. It's election day. Things happen, and we're learning a lot. So we're going to throw up our look here at the Erie mayoral race, because this is one of the big ones that we're keeping an eye on tonight. We've got Joe Schember and Tom Spagel. Those are kind of the two big ones to keep an eye on. But could Sidney Zimmerman play spoiler? That we don't know. Certainly not impossible, though. The odd position of seeing a Democratic incumbent facing a challenger, and one who's no stranger to local politics, and Tom Spagel. Could he mount just enough of a charge here, enough of an insurgency, if you will, to take down a sitting Democratic mayor? Time will tell, but we should start to have results in about 2 hours here on Facebook Live, and we'll bring them to you all throughout the evening. Stand by with us here for just a little bit longer, because we do have Phil English coming to join us, and the former congressman will have plenty to share. We're going to ask him about these local races, and we'll ask what he's seeing on the political scene in general. There's so much to learn and so much to look at with him. We're going to lay out for just a moment here, only because I need to take a drink of water. So hang on for just one moment, and we'll rejoin right after this. And we're back here on Facebook Live, continuing to bring you live coverage throughout the evening, getting you set with everything you need to know. And yes, I do indeed have a Diet Mountain Dew with me here, because I've got another 3.5 hours to go, and a little caffeine keeps you going on the long night, sitting under very hot lights here, actually, at our alert desk. I want to take a moment and kind of take you behind the scenes of what goes into a night like this on the news side of things, because on any election night, be it a primary night like this, local municipal primaries, be it what we see next year with midterm elections, or if it's presidential election itself, like we saw just last November, there's a lot of moving pieces that go into making this all come together. We've got crews all throughout the field tonight. We have our Haley Potter. She's out looking at the sheriff's race, as well as any possible voter issues that might arise. Our Elspeth Meisner is covering voting amendments that you saw on the ballot. She's also looking at anything that pops up. Pardon me, breaking news. She'll be heading out to it this evening. And our Kristen Allen, she's covering the race out in Warren. And in Crawford County, we have Jamison Hicksonbaugh. He's down there covering the race for mayor of Meadville. But let's take you through some of the local races, if I can get our equipment to work, which, to be honest with you, I'm not sure, but we're going to do our best. I see we have the mayoral race up and they're on the air, so I don't want to dump out of that for just a moment. So in the meantime, we're going to wait, only because the technology that we use on the air and that we use back here at the alert desk in some ways runs through the same process. There's the same pieces of equipment. So if I tweak something here, it could change what you see on your TV screens at home. And then our producer is going to come back here and have my neck, and that would not be a good thing. So be a little patient with me here for just a few more minutes, and then I promise you we'll be able to go and tweak what we see on those screens and start bringing you some of the races piece by piece. Instead, let's take one moment and take a peek at the city of Erie, because it is a gorgeous day out there on this primary day. And frankly, I'm not allowed to go outside because I'm doing this, so I'm just going to enjoy looking outside for a moment as we tell you about all the different races that matter to you. If you're watching this here on Facebook Live, you know that there's a lot to talk about on this primary day, and if you voted, you certainly know as well just how many offices are up for election. So let us know in the comments what you would like to know. What matters to you on this primary day, and we'll try to bring in somebody to answer your questions. Here's a look at the race for mayor in Erie. Again, this is probably the second biggest race that we're keeping an eye on tonight. The big race is probably county executive, and after that is the Erie mayoral race. But after that, maybe it's mayor of Meadville that's the big race, or city or county council. Just depends on what matters to you. So again, let us know in the comments. I'm going to pull those up on my phone right now and take a peek at what does matter to you. So again, let us know in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, whether or not you voted today. Let us know that too, and let us know again what matters to you. I want to take a moment and talk about the state Supreme Court race, because it's one that doesn't always get a ton of attention, but that's going to play a big role in your life, especially here in an area like ours. Anything that involves gun control the state Supreme Court is likely going to be looking at any cases that might involve gun control. That is what we're hearing from them. We're hearing that they really want to look into gun laws, gun control laws, concealed carry laws. Let me explain all of this, because I actually have the time to be able to do it here and break it all down for you. There's laws in the books right now in Pennsylvania that say that municipalities can't write their own gun legislation, that they have to follow whatever the state's legislation is. But there's also legal precedent that says people aren't able to challenge municipal laws unless they've been directly harmed by them. So what municipalities are doing, especially bigger cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, are writing their own gun control laws and saying, okay, well, somebody would have to break our law for it to be challenged, so we can write these laws and people will have to obey it. Other people are then deciding to intentionally break those gun laws just so that they can appeal them through the state court system. And some of the judges running for state Supreme Court have said that they are eager to hear those cases. I know that's a little convoluted, but basically, state law says you can't do this. Municipalities say, oh, yes, we can. Gun owners in turn say, oh, no, you can't. And so we're going to have a legal battle there, and it's going, I guarantee you, it's going to make its way to the state Supreme Court. That is 100% a given. And what happens after that really depends on who's sitting on that bench. These races really do matter. People don't always think about them, but they really matter, because these are, for example, the judges who threw out challenges to the election rulings. These are judges who said that votes could be counted even if they were postmarked on time but arrived late. The state Supreme Court has a big say in your day-to-day life. You might not realize it, though. And whoever you elect, whoever you give a nomination to today, is one step closer to getting a 10-year term. 10 years on the bench, more than $200,000 a year. Whoever wins not the primaries today, but the general election in November, is going to get more than $2 million of your money. That alone should be enough reason for you to want to head out to the polls today. Again, if you haven't voted, you've got, if my math holds, just more than 90 minutes. Let's say 105 minutes. How's that for math? Just shy of 2 hours, 1 hour, 45 minutes to get to the polls before they close. Again, we go back to our mayoral look here as we see Mayor Joe Schember and Tom Spagle, his Democratic challenger. This is the second biggest race we're keeping an eye on tonight here in our area. We'll have Phil English back with us in just a moment. He's on Erie News Now at 6 right now. So if you'd like to hear from him, the former congressman, tune in. Erie News Now at 6, WICU and WSCE. You can get it all right there. Let's take a peek up and down the ballot. That's what I'm doing right now. I've got it all in front of me. This is just how many people are running for office. That should give you an idea of just how much we have to look through. Actually, I'm short a page there. So, all of Erie County, this of course isn't what you'll see on your ballot because, for example, if you don't live in Waterford, you're not going to have issues on Waterford Township, or if you're not in Venango Township or Washington Township, any of these throughout our area, Springfield Township, Summit, Mill Creek, Northeast, right? Pardon me, your ballot, of course, is tailored to your region, but that should give you an indication of just how many people are going to be elected to jobs this evening, and a lot of those jobs pay. A lot of those jobs pay handsomely, and so that's why this is so largely important what you're doing tonight. So often those municipal elections get overlooked, right? It's not a presidential election. It's not a midterm election. You're not putting people into Congress. You're not putting somebody into the White House. So why should I care, you think? But the answer is that you should care an awful lot. And that's why we're bringing in experts tonight to break all of this down for you. There's so much important news that we're covering all evening throughout our coverage on Erie News Now. We're live on air right now through 7 o'clock. We have Erie News Now at 7, the only 7 o'clock news broadcast here in Erie, but we'll be live here on Facebook Live all the way until 9:30. Polls close at 8. We should start to have information and polling results coming in almost immediately after that happens, and the moment we do, we'll bring it to you right here. So this is the place to be for your election result coverage. The moment we have numbers, we'll bring them to you. If you want to stay up to date on who's going to fill all of these vacancies, who's going to get party nominations tonight that push them forward to the November elections, this is the place to tune in for all your election news. We'll continue to break down races here throughout our area. Again, we're waiting on Phil English. The former congressman will be joining us in just a moment. He's chatting with our Paul Wagner right now. We'll also have more with Paul Wagner. We've got him back in the building, and we are taking full advantage of that. We'll go through local races. We'll tell you about everything that you need to know because, again, it is not too late to vote. You still have 1 hour and 40 minutes to head to the polls. You're not going to encounter long lines. I can pretty well assure you that, having been out and voted earlier today. I've got my little I voted sticker, don't worry. So, wearing it on the inside of the blazer just so that it's not a beacon here on the exterior. But, again, get out there and vote. Get out there and vote. Or don't complain, right? It's that simple. You have a say over who fills all of these vacancies. You have a say over who controls the county executive seat, over who sits on county council. If you live in the city of Erie, over city council. You have a say over township supervisors. If you're outside of the city, you can decide on judges tonight, on clerk positions, on tax collector positions. So if the candidate you vote for loses, then you're free to complain, right? But get out there and vote. Do your civic duty. Vote in the primary elections. Be an informed voter, and that's what we're trying to help you to be this evening. Make sure that you know everything you need to know as we head on into primary day 2021. Certainly not the vitriol that we saw in the 2020 presidential election, thank goodness. I'm not sure that any of us would be ready to handle another one of those, but we have coverage right here on Erie News Now at our alert desk. Again, we pull up the race for mayor. This is one of the big ones in our area. And it's one of the big ones that we're keeping an eye on because millions of dollars of your money goes and in shaping the future of this city, possibly for decades. So again, let us know in the questions or in the comment section of this post what you would like to know about on this primary day. here we go. Alrighty, we're back here on Facebook Live. We have former Congressman Phil English with us. Sir, first of all, thanks for taking the time. You know, you got Paul Wagner, the real deal, on air. Now you have to come sit back with the kids on the digital side of things.
Well, I appreciate the chance to join you and have you elevate the conversation.
If I'm in charge of elevating the conversation, boy, oh boy, should the viewers look out. But, sir, let's start here. As we see so many races up and down the ballot, what are the ones that you're keeping an eye on? Because, you know, you may not be in office anymore, but I know that you're certainly keeping an eye on the political scene.
I think there are a number of local races that are going to have a big impact on how the community comes out of COVID in terms of job creation, encouraging investment, encouraging development, building the economy of the future. And I think clearly the mayor's race is going to have an impact on that. I think the county executive race is going to have a very significant impact. I think that race has evolved as having more uncertainties than a lot of people predicted. I also think Erie City Council races, they have tended to be under the radar screens, but right now you have a coalition running a slate of candidates who are very progressive, and at the same time you have some more traditional candidates, and I think this is going to have a big impact on City Hall, policing, how COVID monies are divvied up. And I think in the fall you could have a real referendum on some issues like taxes, policing, job creation and attraction. And I think that would be a healthy debate for the community to have. I think community leaders have to go back to the people and try to learn their mind and give them options for how we proceed on the Bayfront and in the downtown.
Since you were running for office, how do you see that the electorate has changed? Because it seems that we have drifted further and further to the poles of the political spectrum.
Well, I noticed back as I was leaving Congress that people were becoming more polarized. I think some of that was the war, but it was other issues as well. That polarization and straight ticket voting has continued. I've never been an advocate of straight ticket voting. Personally, I think that the more people are presented with real choices in the fall, the healthier. And I think both parties, nationally and on down to locally, now are far more into pushing slates. I don't think that's a healthy development. In addition to the polarization, I think there have been big changes in campaign technology. It's now possible for people to go door to door, targeting households that show a consistency in voting in the primary. When I was running for Erie City Controller, I just knocked doors. I didn't even know if people were registered there. That's complicated though, because you have now mail-in voting and the option of registering virtually on election day. So there are a lot of uncertainties involved that technology can fix. You also have this. You have the ability of networks to give people access to information that previously came from only a limited number of sources.
So it's easier to disseminate information, easier to target those specific voters who you know will vote for you. And again, it's all data, right? It all comes down to more and more data.
And it's also possible to run a shoestring campaign. I mean, Sydney Zimmerman and her mayoral campaign is, I sense, running very much that kind of a campaign aimed at social media, aimed at that kind of grassroots campaigning. And I think people ought to take a look at how things go for her. Christy Ganebus last year made a similar effort to utilize social media and ended up carrying the county. I think that technology is changing. I think people's appetites have changed for the kinds of issues they're concerned with. The challenge is going to be, are any of the candidates this fall going to be able to step out and offer a clear vision for economic development, which is the code word for jobs, opportunities, and remaking the community, the local economy, to modernize it.
As someone who has been through the gauntlet in terms of running for different offices, what do you think makes a good candidate for some of these local offices? Let's say for county executive, when you're trying to decide for whom you're going to vote, what sort of qualities are you looking for in someone?
I'm looking for judgment first and foremost, and that's something that's a quicksilver concept that's very hard to get your hands on. So I also look at credentials. You know, have they been involved in the economy? Have they been involved in nonprofits at a position where they had to make real decisions? And what were those decisions? I think that it's fair to say there are all kinds of professions and backgrounds that could lead you successfully into public life. And I find that people right now put a premium on experiences. I think having a good story is very important. It makes for an appealing candidate. But sometimes what makes for an appealing candidate doesn't make for a successful result. You know, right now this community is going through such a scale of change that I think we need to be looking for people who actually have a fairly clear sense of the North Star of where they want to go in making decisions on issues that we haven't anticipated yet. There's so much at stake, there's so much money involved, and I think the image of this community and its ability to thrive in the next century at a time when bigger cities, I think, are going to have a harder time attracting people. This is a great opening for a community like Erie.
We're seeing on the national scene and also locally by who's running in these races a rise in political newcomers and viable political newcomers, people who have never run for office before, either being strong contenders or even winning races. Do you see that as a good thing, or in a situation where we're coming out of a pandemic and there's a lot of money on the table, are you looking for experience?
I'm looking for experience, and the challenge is figuring out what kind of experience. Right now, I think people are skeptical of people who have had a long career in politics. The old way of coming up through the lower rungs and aspiring to higher offices, I think people now increasingly distrust. That may change over time. Joe Biden is an example of a successful individual who has gone through all of the rungs. But I think more and more we are seeing people move over from laterally from other experiences, particularly in places like small business and the nonprofit sectors. But it all comes down to, in Erie, we're into tactile politics. So I think the biggest asset is somebody who has the capacity to sit down and listen to people and engage people and spend some time with them. So you know, there's no one model out there for what makes a good candidate. What makes a good elected official, I think, is the ability to listen and to offer a clear sense of where they want to go, and be adaptable as challenges face the community. There's so many things that we're facing locally, so many needs, so many people, different voices that need to be listened to. I think it takes a special kind of person to flourish in this environment.
It seems that on the national scene right now anyway, the way to get elected is to run to the extremes of your party, and that's going to get you a seat. But does that work in Erie County, or because we're so purple, do you still have to be that true moderate to win a seat?
I think both. I think you have to have appeal to, you know, some of which I find there are some things that appeal on the right that also appeal on the left. Suspicion of authority, for example. I think in Erie, someone who is authentic and is committed to doing on the job and shows that they're following through. Someone with appeal in the center, like, I'll just say Dan Laughlin, is a good example of someone with crossover appeal. However, I think it is right now it is probably easier to gravitate to the polls in the sense of, you know, the two extremes, and pitch from that angle. The problem, of course, is that a lot of people get elected, and once they are there, they find the realities are a lot more complicated, whether they're on city council or whether they're in the U.S. Senate. And the question is, can they adapt? Can they listen to other people? A good example, actually, is Bernie Sanders, a guy who held down a mayoral job who was very successful when he and I were in Congress together. We worked on low-income heating assistance. He was a guy who you could collaborate with, even though he was upfront a socialist. You know, it's not where you are on the political spectrum. It's your energy level. It's your ability to work with others and roll up your sleeves and think outside of the box.
And a willingness to work with others, which, at least on the national scene, is becoming far and far less common.
We'll just say those skills have atrophied.
I think that's our word of the day. Yes, atrophied. Somebody write that down. Yes, we roll along here on Facebook Live with former Congressman Phil English. Is there hope, I guess? Is there hope? Where we see a polarization of politics, and even in some of these races, we see candidates who have intentionally run to the far right or further to the left. I don't know if in Erie County you're ever going to win running really far to the left in a purple county, but are we starting to see that trickle down to the local scene as well, people running further to the polls?
I think as we look at some of the city council races this year, maybe as we look at the county executive race this year, we'll get a sense of how the politics has changed. I still think, and the candidates that entertain my suggestions still tend to recognize that they need to pitch into the middle and talk about what they're going to do rather than divisive issues that may not have that much to do with their office. But it is a conundrum. Let's look at the optimistic side, though. During the Jacksonian period, the country was very badly divided. And it bounced back. During the Civil War, we had a horrible division in this country. And although we were unable to implement Reconstruction, which has been a problem ever since, nevertheless, after the Civil War, our politics kind of came together. We've had other times when we've been deeply divided, like the 1960s. I think with the right leadership, the country can be reunited again, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be an act of redeveloping a political culture that will allow that to happen, and also people buying into the idea that politics is about rights and responsibilities of supporting the community and also taking on other obligations. This is a real challenge, I think, to get people to respect service again, at whatever level. I am optimistic in a place like Erie because we know each other, and at core, I think Erie people want to work together.
Are we not the last vestige, but among the few remaining of areas that really are still that old school political scene where it's all about getting out and shaking hands and building those bridges of getting people to work together?
You know, I happen to believe that old school is coming back because I think a big part of the problem with our politics is elected officials and candidates have no longer been connecting with people. My sense is that in Erie, tactile politics, the politics of touch, is really what matters, and it's really what people are looking for. I think that those who experiment with that as candidates are going to discover that they're going to be able to attract support from across the spectrum. What is retro is this breaking people into tribal blocks, by which I mean in every way. People are divided based on what groups they feel they belong to, their heritage, but also their religion, and other points of division that weren't as obvious in recent years. I think that tribalism is probably a bigger threat to the country. Can we overcome it locally? Probably, because we all kind of still go to school together, go to the same clubs. This is a community of a scale where you get to know people.
If you were going to run for office again, not that I'm suggesting that by any means, but it's not too late. We'll start a write-in campaign for you. But if you were going to run again, what sort of approach would you take? Would you take that social media approach? Would you try to barnstorm around the area? would you try to be someone who runs to the extremes of the party? Would you try to be a uniter? If you were going to do this all again, what approach would you try to take to win an office?
What people in politics have forgotten is that politics is a contest of ideas. And I would be inclined to go back to my roots, and I might be wrong on this, but offer people real suggestions, real concrete things as a candidate that I'd be for, and invite people to buy into them regardless of what their party registration is, what their nominal political philosophy is. That seemed to work back in the 1980s when I was first getting involved, and we had surprising crossover support, not only for myself, but for people like Tom Ridge. I think that could be done again, but I think it's going to require candidates to step out, take risks, and demonstrate and talk about the vision that they see, and try to sell people on it, not just tell people what they want to hear. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does.
And I'm not going to be running for office anymore.
I'm seeing it now. Return to office for Phil English. We'll get Tom Ridge back in on this. This all seems very, very plausible to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'll work on drafting Tom Ridge, but he'll probably shoot me.
But as we look at that, what is the future of the Republican Party? Because you mentioned somebody like former Governor Ridge, who at one time would have been held up as kind of the ideal Republican candidate, now in some ways almost pushed to the fringes of the party by being a moderate. Do you see the party swinging back in that direction ever?
I think that moderate is in the eye of the beholder. And Ronald Reagan was, and I'm a Reagan Republican, Ronald Reagan was elected, was seen as a candidate as representing a strong ideological position, and yet when he ran for re-election, he won 49 states. And he was able to rise above the divisions, but through good humor and also being very articulate, and he took a terrible beating, as much as most recent politicians have. The answer is, Ethan, I think that politics goes through cycles. What is viewed as an extreme position today, many people may not hold in the future. The coalitions are changing. How does this affect the Republican Party? The Republican Party, I think, has an opportunity to become much more what I always wanted it to be, a working voters party, an advocate for working families, not just for their benefits, but also for their job prospects, for their upward mobility. I think that Republicans, if they do move into the middle, are going to be able to draw some bright contrasts with the Democrats. And the Democrats are also going to have, I think, some real opportunities. I think they're going to have to restrain at the national level some of their appetites, and I think they also are going to have to strike the kind of tone of encouraging, a bridging of some of the differences, even on some of the controversial issues. So I think issues like community policing, growing the economy, I don't think you can have social justice without a growing economy. And so the Republicans are going to have an opportunity to offer alternatives. I think the Democrats are going to have an opportunity in office to use their platform to reshape their image with a lot of voters. And it's going to be a big challenge for both. Are both of them going to hold together? I don't know what's going to happen, because I think many voters are tired of both of the major parties, and the question becomes, could there be another opening? Could there be independent candidates running? Could we see more independents running successfully? Can they get on the ballot? You know, one of the things that wasn't mentioned in last year's election was that the Democratic Party won Pennsylvania in part because they systematically went out and got the Green Party knocked off the ballot. If the Republicans had tried a stunt like that, I think they would have been bitterly criticized. If parties like the Green Party and even some parties on the right were allowed to compete with the main parties the way they are in places like New York, you might find a very different environment. You might also see both parties heading a little more into the center. I'm very intrigued by Dan Laughlin's proposal of opening up the primaries to voters to kind of come in and show up on election day and decide which primary they want to vote in. That has been a party building move for Republicans in other areas, but more to the point, it's held both parties to a higher standard.
I think that's a great point. And as you mentioned something I want to touch on here, talking about local politics. You'd mentioned that the demographics of the parties are changing, that more and more the Republican Party has an opportunity to become the working person's party. When you were getting your start in politics, union members almost exclusively were going to vote Democratic. Now, we've almost seen a sea change there, where union members increasingly are voting Republican. What does that mean for local politics in a union town like Erie?
I think it's going to be transformative. Many of my friends who were leaders in organized labor would quietly entertain some affinity for the Republican Party, but couldn't really talk about it. I think that certain parts of the labor movement, like for example the building trades, are going to find more and more opportunities to align with the Republican Party. I think that public employee unions, for a variety of reasons tied to government spending, probably are going to continue to align with the Democratic Party and are going to be dominated by leadership that's fairly ideological. Now, I tell you, I say that without any rancor because I was endorsed several times by the NEA. I think that the Democrats are going to have an opportunity to continue to recruit more highly paid, highly educated professionals. But if their tax policies don't produce growth and end up doing things that are not advertised, I think that could blow up on them. There are a variety of reasons why I think the Republicans could move and recapture some of the moderate voters. That includes issues like climate change, where if the Republican Party gets into gear and talks directly about climate change and energy, they may have, I think, a much more effective message than the Democrats in this space. It remains to be seen. I think this is going to be the next few years a real sea change in national politics. If we can bring the bitterness down, the poison down, I think we can get a lot of people to re-engage. Ethan, the thing that has struck me is how difficult it is to recruit people to run for office now. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they just think politics is awful and they don't want to be in the thick of it. And some of the people who step up and want to run, I would never criticize people for wanting to run, but some of them don't seem to have all of the same motivations. I think we need to have locally and nationally an environment where high-performing people, whatever their background, whether they're volunteers, whether they're involved in nonprofits, whether they're in heads of community organizations, or they're highly skilled professionals, feel comfortable putting a toe in the water and running for local office. Without them being engaged, then it's left to kind of the political junkies and the returning politicos to make the decisions on things like the $80 million that has been handed to the city for COVID relief.
And I'll tell you, just in interviewing, goodness knows how many local political figures, it's always that refreshing moment when you're like, oh, they're a decent person, because it seems odd nowadays to have a politician who also is just a decent human being and somebody who really cares about the community. It seems like that has gone from the norm to now a rarity. And is that how we get back to civility, to not shouting louder than the other person?
I think there are a variety of answers. Some of them are cultural. Interestingly enough, the new technology and social media instead of cutting against these trends, I think can be enlisted to help fix the problem. More on that perhaps some other time. But I think, when I served in Congress, what struck me was how many of the people I served with got into politics for all the right reasons, and really were interested in making a difference. And I found that true of people like John Lewis, who I served with on Ways and Means, but many who I strongly disagreed with on core issues or vision or philosophy, but I found that they wanted to do the right thing. I don't think people in places like Congress get the credit they deserve for their motivation. It is frustrating to me that there are so many examples now of people in Congress doing things that they should know better. I think that we need to have a national civic movement that brings people back into the political system, not just to vote, not just to volunteer their time to elect people who are their neighbors or their friends or who they've worked with, but also to interrupt their career, interrupt their family engagement, and take the time to serve as Jefferson thought our political class should be, people willing as volunteers to spend a couple of terms in the state legislature, a couple of terms in the school district, or whatever office.
And last one for you here, as we look up and down the ballot for all of these county and local races, is that the best thing about Erie County politics, is that at the national scene, decency is hard to come by, but I know quite a few of the people who are running for all of these races, and there are still decent people out there running for office.
There are decent people running for office, and I think there are some people who I would say on some issues I don't agree with, but might not agree with on national issues, but who are coming in with an intent to do the right thing. And I think they need to be encouraged. My sense, this is going to change as COVID recedes. But the biggest problem we've had in the last year and a half is that with the COVID environment, traditional grassroots politics have been very difficult to manage. And a lot of traditional grassroots candidates don't have the Zoom technology to reach out. So I think that grassroots politics can be done effectively in a place like Erie, and I think it can be reinstated as we move out of COVID.
One can only hope. Sir, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you taking the time. We'll let Congressman Phil English get out of here as we turn off microphones and shuffle things around. He's got a hit coming up. You're good there to go, sir. And you're mic'd up there. You can catch the Congressman on Erie News Now at 7, because we're not giving him any breaks here as we run him through the gauntlet here on Erie News Now.
Nice to meet you.
We continue with our coverage here on Erie News Now on our Facebook page. We're going to step away there's my second dose of caffeine. We're going to step away for just a moment, kind of give everybody a chance to reset. Tune into Erie News Now at 7 on WICU. We'll join you right back here on Facebook in just a bit. Stay with us.